everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Faerie Conclave. This is episode 98. I'm your host, Alec. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm super excited to have a returning guest on to talk about another commander deck, and that's Ron. Hi, Ron. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing wonderfully. Thank you for having me back.
Yes. No, I loved the first episode that we did, which we were just talking about how it was almost a year ago now, which doesn't make sense. But it was one of my favorite episodes. And whenever somebody comes on and I'm just like, that was so much fun, I always want to make sure to write their name down so I can have them on again. And so you've been on my list ever since then.
Yay! I'm glad I've made a lasting impression.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And last time we talked about I interviewed you about your Queen Itinerant Meddler deck.
Yes.
So I kind of wanted to check in. Are you still playing that deck? Are you still...
I am still playing it, actually. So the thing about that deck is that it's one of my favorites to play, and it's been told to me that it's a favorite for other people to play against. So It's kind of like a permanent. I don't want to ever get rid of it, but I always keep it in the back of my mind. So anytime a new set comes out, I'm like, are there alternate win cons? Are there any like group hug cards that could be good for it? So I always keep it in my mind, and it's kind of the easiest one to update because I have such specific criteria that I'm looking for cards to include in it, that when a card is just right, it's like I know it belongs in Queen. So I've recently did some updates, but it will be a perma deck for me.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely have a couple decks like that, but then I have others that like I've probably talked about before on the podcast and that have since kind of been disassembled and turned into something else or just like taken apart. Yeah, so I'm kind of curious I haven't really had very many opportunities to like check back in on somebody's deck that I talked about that long ago. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're still playing it and you still kind of like, upgrade it with stuff. So I'm excited to talk about another one of your commander decks today because
this is the total opposite of Queen. This is like polar opposites.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say, and it's kind of similar to a deck that I have played before, and I just love. Anyway, before we get into it too much, really quick, I want to do a shout out for one of my patrons at the Conclave Mentor patron level, and it's a very small group right now, so I'm sure you've heard these names being shouted out before, but on today's episode, the shout out is going to go to Ms. Eldritch. So Deanna, thank you very much for being a patron. I really appreciate it. But yeah, so let's...
Deanna.
Yes, definitely love to shout her out anytime we get the chance to. But yeah, so let's get into this deck interview because this is a commander that I, for one, am scared of usually when I see it. And
I think that is the general reaction of this commander.
Yep.
Yeah. I hate to be that person, but it's that person that sits at the table and slams the commander in the command zone and everybody's like, ugh. And then you're like, no, but it's not what you're thinking. And it's like, Actually, yeah, it's exactly what you're thinking. It's just like, it's done in a silly way. So like, yes, this deck is going to stomp and it's going to do exactly what you expect it to do. But the theme of it, I wanted to make sure at least was fun for people to see.
Yeah, no, that's the thing about it is I think a lot of commanders that are very scary like that, if you build them very kind of like strategically, I guess, or like with intention and you have restrictions on what you put in there, then it definitely changes how it plays and all of that kind of stuff, which this deck is. So
I love how much we're building the anticipation because we haven't said what the commander is yet.
I'm just like... Anyway.
And the big reveal.
Yes, exactly. So my first question is, who is the commander that we're going to be talking about? And and what inspired you to kind of put this deck together in the first place?
We are talking about Jodah the Unifier.
Bow, 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 bow.
Crowd goes wild. So I feel like Jodah was pretty hyped up when the set came out, and I don't often build commanders that are super hyped up because then a bunch of different people end up with like pretty much exactly the same deck, and that's not what I like doing. I don't think that's super interesting. But I did a sealed pod when Dominaria came out, and my guests and I all opened our boxes live and sorted through and built a commander deck live from our sealed boxes and then played them. And I ended up playing Jodah the Unifier as a sealed deck. And I really loved how it played. And I had in my mind an idea to build a 5-color deck that would include all of the backgrounds from Baldur's Gate, or as many as I could include logistically that, would make sense in one deck. So I wanted to make an Oops All Backgrounds deck for a while, and I had initially tried it with Ramos, but Ramos cares about multicolored spells, and all of the backgrounds are single color, and it just didn't seem like a good use of the deck. So I ended up scrapping the idea and rebuilding Ramos appropriately, but the idea of the Oops All Backgrounds was kind of still in my mind, and I never found the right commander to do it with. So once I had played Jodah and I enjoyed playing him, I was like, well, he's WUBRG, and this is my chance to make that all backgrounds theme come to fruition. So I included all of the backgrounds initially when I was building the deck, and then went through them, and I think there's 29 backgrounds. I started removing some that really just didn't have anything to do with Jodah at all, or cared too much about very specific things that I knew the deck wasn't going to go in that direction. So I started taking things out, and I think I settled on 19 in the end. But several of those have to do with or care about dragons. So I had to make sure that in order to make them usable in the deck, I had to have dragons. So I said, all right, I'm going to make the bulk of my creatures, if not all my creatures, legendary dragons, because Jodah cares about legendaries. And all of the Baldur's Gate enchantments, all of the backgrounds are legendary, so they do cascade into each other as well. They activate the legendary cascade that Jodah has. And the dragon theme came up because some of the Baldur's Gate enchantments care about dragons. So it just kind of snowballed from there, and like it felt like the deck built itself a little bit. I was like, okay, I'm going to throw in all of the backgrounds, and I'm going to throw in all of the legendary dragons, and then I'm going to start deleting. So I started deleting whatever I knew I didn't want. I wanted my dragons to really care about each other, or have like strong ETB effects, or something that, made sense for them to be usable. Dragons are also very, very costly, so I tried to pick things that were low cost as well. And then I filled the rest of the space with some light removal, because the dragons do so much work as it is, and Jodah does so much work, and being able to cascade does so much work that I wasn't afraid of my opponent when playing this deck. I kind of just was like, all right, well, if things go away, I'll just have to rebuild, and I have to make sure that my mana base is strong enough to support that, because there's a lot of costly things in the deck, and I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to slotting in the right ramp, or the right artifacts that could get me the mana pool that I need, as opposed to worrying about too much interaction. So I put in, like 4 or 5 pieces of interaction or removal, just to pad, and then the rest was focusing on making sure my mana base got to those 5 colors and got enough to support paying for very costly creatures.
Yeah, I love that so much as just like a deck idea. One reason for that is for many years I played a Sisay Weatherlight Captain deck,
Yay.
which was so much fun. It's similar. It's like a 5-color deck that cares about legendary creatures, and I feel like back then it was probably around 2019 is when Sisay came out. So like 2019 to 2021ish was when legendary creatures started becoming like much more of a staple in standard, at least in like standard sets. So it was fun for each set to come out and I'd be like, ooh, okay, I get to check out all the new legends, and there are a ton, so I get like all these options. But then by the time I was kind of planning on taking some decks apart at the end of last year, the deck had just become, it was like too much, and it had reached a point where like the legends were too good and the power level just was like way too high for what I wanted to use it for. But at the time I just couldn't think of any restrictions. I'm like, I want to try to restrict it in some way so that I have less options, I guess, but I couldn't really come up with anything.
So I'm really grateful that I had this idea, because it made building the deck so much easier. Because when you have every legendary and every color combination at your disposal, it's easy to just say, what do I want to do with this, you know?
Yeah.
So I think having the idea of the backgrounds and then caring about dragons, it just helped me refine my choices and made it a lot easier to build. But the other thing that I love about Jodah is that there's a bajillion different ways to build him, because his ability, the cascade, can work with anything. So it can be any kind of theme. It, the ability doesn't impact the type of deck or the type of cards that you put in the deck, as long as they're legendary. Where other commanders, you build them and you kind of know what people are slotting into that deck. You know what I mean? Like they're more predictable, and the hype around building the same commander and the problem that everybody ends up with the same deck doesn't happen with Jodah. Every single Jodah deck that I've seen or played against plays completely differently. And I haven't seen too many that, you can have a pod of 4 Jodahs and they'll all play completely differently. So that's something I really love about this one. It's that everybody that I've seen build Jodah has built it in their own way.
Yeah, that's the really nice thing about open-ended commanders like this. Like just caring about legends, now that we have so many legendary options, you can really kind of like pick some more niche area to focus on. And I think the backgrounds and dragons is a really smart way to do it, because looking at the backgrounds, they're like, for the most part, they're 3 or less mana. So you can spend like your early turns playing backgrounds and getting those kinds of effects. And then dragons, of course, are like 5 or more mana for the most part. So it actually gives you, like, combining these two gives you a nice mana curve, which I just think it's like a smart way to build it that ends up working out really nicely for a functional deck to come out of it.
Yeah. I always have fun playing it. It doesn't always win because, people are afraid of it. So you do get targeted a little bit early on. And the wise thing for people to do, which sucks when it happens, and I don't want to give up this secret of how to play against me, but the wise thing to do is to remove those artifacts that give me my perfect mana base, because when people start destroying things like what's that card called, the Timeless Lotus, which also was in Dominaria, it enters tapped, but it taps for Wooburg, so it helps me get a lot of things out. It helps me get Jodah out, even if I have to replay him, even with the commander tax, that one artifact tapping for Wooburg is just like perfect for this deck. So when people remove the Timeless Lotus, or something like that, it's the right move 100%, because it hurts a 5-color deck like this, especially a 5-color deck that has such costly things in it. It sucks to lose that, but it's totally like, I understand. I'm like, that's the move. It's fine. You know, I
Yeah.
think it hurts me more to remove those artifacts than removing Jodah himself or other creatures. Like, the problem
Gotcha.
is that I can cast things, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I think the weakness of this deck is that not getting the right mana or the right colors or losing those artifacts is it makes it very, very difficult to be able to play out those high cost things or to recast Jodah. And so when playing against a deck like this that's really aggressive and can take off, the best thing you can do is remove the things that gives people the right mana base.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for a lot of people, it's kind of, they think it's going to be rude of them to target other people's mana. But I feel like for me, if somebody, and a lot of the time it's me, if somebody's playing a 5-color deck, like that's the risk that they're taking playing a 5-color deck. Yeah. And so it's, if I'm the one playing it, like I totally understand if you blow up my Timeless Lotus, or for me, a lot of the time it's Chromatic Lantern is the kind of card I rely on maybe a little too much for things like that. And if someone blows that up, I'm like, yep, that's, you should probably be doing that because I'm being greedy playing every possible card that I can.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, and Jodah being able to cascade eliminates the, you know, it potentially lets me play 2 big creatures back to back for the cost of 1, you know. Sometimes I cascade into another background, which is just, you know, 2 mana or 3 mana or something like that. But sometimes I do cascade into another big beefy boy that I didn't have to pay for, you know.
Yeah.
So being able to limit what I can play by destroying those artifacts is a big deal. But I do find in my experience that people, and I'm guilty of this as well, people really only load their decks with like creature removal and aren't really equipped to remove enchantments and artifacts as readily or as frequently. So things like the Felwar Stone or Chromatic Ori or the Immortal Sun, Timeless Lotus, like all those things that really help me out don't get removed as often as they probably should. But when they do, I feel it.
Definitely. Something I want to happen more in Commander, just like in general, is for people to play more like monocolor decks. I'm always like a big advocate for monocolor decks, even if I don't, you know, maybe take my own advice a lot of the time. But
I love monocolored decks, and I am trying. I play a lot of mono. A lot of people know that about me. So I have been spending a better part of this year kind of branching out and building more multicolor decks or decks in colors that I'm less familiar with. So I'm on a mono red journey right now because that ended up being the color that I've played the least. And so in order for me to better familiarize myself with the color, I'm trying to build more mono red decks so that I can focus entirely on that that color and really get to know those cards, because they're cards that I admittedly am the least familiar with, not only just like in because I haven't played it as much, but also I find when I play against a mono red deck or a red heavy deck, I don't really know the cards well, you know, and I'm like, what's that do? What's that do? What's that do? And I just want to be I want to familiarize myself more with like the red staples and like how to play that color well. You know, I want to be a well-rounded player, and I want to be better at the game. And there's like a whole fifth of the game that I don't understand very well. So I'm on a mono red journey right now.
I love that. Yeah, I think that it's important to do stuff like that. For one, just because it's fun to build decks with restrictions. Like you're going to have like they always say restrictions breed creativity, which I guess, you know, that's exactly like what you've done with Jodah, having it be backgrounds and dragons. But yeah, the colors are just kind of like the easiest way to do that. Like my commander is mono red, so I'm forced to like go through all the mono red cards that might be applicable and kind of learn what they do and try to figure out how to make it work. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how we got onto this topic since we're currently talking about a 5-color deck for this. But yeah, it was because monocolor decks are just so much safer from being disrupted in their mana that way. Because you can throw basics in. There's more room for like some utility lands. And then, they're not going to be worried about you like blowing up one of their rocks because they'll be fine. So yeah, just adding to that.
No, that's actually, it's a perfect segue because speaking about typically playing mono-colored, and for me, my highest played color is white. I have a lot of mono-white decks, but then I also have things with white in them, like Azorius decks and Selesnya decks. So when I build something like Jodah that's a 5-color, I tend to put in the familiar staples, the things that I know off the top of my mind or kind of auto includes for me. And a lot of those cards are white. So whenever I play multicolor decks, I'm always mindful that I'm not making it white heavy because I don't want a 5-color deck that's basically a mono white deck. You know what I mean? Like the point of having a 5-color deck is to play all the colors. So I really wanted Jodah to be evenly distributed as possible. So when I scroll down on my Mox field and I look at the percentage of colors in my deck, it's pretty close to even. Wow. It's 27% white, 22% blue, 22% black, 30% red, 30% green, and 19% colorless. I'm 9 cards over right now just from like adding and removing things. So these numbers fluctuate quite a bit when I add and change things. I wanted to be really mindful that I'm not just playing like all the white cards I know well and love. I wanted it to be and feel different than what I'm used to.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's very difficult to do. While you were talking about that, I just pulled up my 5-color deck, which is a Saga deck. And it's like 39% white, 37% green. And then the other 3 colors are less than 16%. So it's very, and partially that's because like white and green might care more about enchantments.
Yes.
But yeah, still it's like, in a 5-color deck, and that just kind of makes your mana easier if it's all a little bit more balanced. So good job doing that. That's like very difficult to balance all that.
Thanks.
So when it comes to just like sitting down to play this deck, what is it that you just like brings you the most joy? What is it that you like about playing it?
I think the thing I like the most about this deck is that it ends up having a very busy board state. And I don't have a lot of decks that do that. I don't have like a lot of decks where my table is just crowded with cards. And I think this deck kind of tends to do that because of all the cascading and a lot of the things like backgrounds, they're enchantments, so they don't often get removed. And the board state ends up being really busy. And I don't love to take long turns. But I like that this deck kind of forces me to read over my cards and, remember what my triggers are and what my upkeep is and what's happening when certain things happen and what's triggering. It's a lot to keep track of, and it makes me feel like mentally stimulated. Like I feel like I'm getting to know the cards better. I know what things do, and I feel like it makes me a stronger and better player because I'm keeping track of a lot of things at once, and it's not a mindless deck. There's a lot of things that you have to keep up with, and it doesn't necessarily end up being long turns. It's just I have to be mindful of what's doing what at what times,
Yeah, especially because looking through the backgrounds, they, for the most part, they all have totally different effects.
Yes.
And they all kind of trigger at different times. So there are like a bunch that trigger when something you have
on attack
attacks,
or yeah.
but then there's also like enters the battlefield stuff like at the beginning of
Right.
turn. So yeah, I could see that if you have 5 or 6 of these out, you're like, okay, got to make sure I actually remember to do all of these at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And which is fun. I like that. It's very like, I kind of call it a beginning of the night type of deck where, you know, you have your full brain power available to track all of that.
So I have a strategy. I will place things on my board or on my battlefield in order of how they trigger. So if it's when something ETBs, then I'll put those things next to each other, and then I might, if it's like at end step or something like that, then I might put those below rather than just in a straight line. So I kind of know what's happening at the beginning of my turn, what's happening at the end of my turn, and I kind of rearrange them as I play so that I know what's happening when.
Nice.
And I kind of did the same thing with the dragons. You know, I wanted to make sure that the dragons coming in did something. So either they have an ETB effect, because one of my backgrounds allows me to blink things, so I can re-trigger those ETB effects, or something that gives me some kind of value. Whenever X happens, then X happens. You know? So I really wanted to be deliberate with my dragons and get as much value from them as possible, because in the event of like a board wipe or removal, I want to have gotten some value from having played it. And that they are a lot to keep track of as well. So it's not just the backgrounds, the dragons do things as well, and I kind of have to be full brain mode on the deck as I'm playing it. But I think that's kind of like the element of fun about it, because it is my big brain deck, you know, like it's the thing that I know I have to pay attention to if I'm playing it. So I have to be well rested to play this deck.
Yeah, I definitely have some decks like that. And I hadn't really thought about the dragons either, but you're right. Each one has a full text box. So it's lots of different stuff. And speaking of the dragons, I wanted to ask, since this is kind of probably the most exciting part of the deck, do you have some dragons that you want to shout out as kind of being like some of your favorites to play in this deck specifically?
Yes. I'm always happy to see a dragon in this deck. I like every time I play one, I'm like, ooh, you know, like I don't even know which one it is. But I think the heaviest hitters in this deck are probably Miram, Sentinel Worm. It has flying in Ward 2, and whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. So not only am I cascading into new things, but I'm also making copies of the things that are entering.
Absurd.
And if they have like ETB effects, those things be again. And Laughless makes tokens. So I mean, obviously I know Miram doesn't trigger copies of tokens, but Laughless makes me more dragons. So whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield, create a 5/5 red dragon. So these two together are powerhouse, because Miram is making a token come in, and that token is making another token. So it's just dragons on dragons on dragons. Of course, Old Gnawbone, because of the treasures. But you know, it is a 7 mana card, and while treasures are wonderful and always valued and appreciated, by the time he comes out, like a late game Gnawbone is not as full as you would think, because there's already so much ugly stuff in here that it's like, by the time Gnawbone comes out, it's not like, oh nuts, Gnawbone. It's like there are already other problems on the board, you know?
Yeah.
So but he's great. He's the one that like people see it in the deck and they're like, yeah, duh, auto include, you have to put Gnawbone in there. But probably my two favorites in this are Laughless and Miram. I love what's come out.
Yeah, especially with Jodah's ability to like potentially just get twice as many dragons out as each time you play one. And then, yeah, having that trigger those so that they make even more dragons. You're like, okay, I played one card and got like 4 dragons out of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
kind of crazy. It's almost unfair. It's like that should not be allowed, but here we are.
Yeah, especially Miriam. Every time I read that, I kind of forget how intense that is. And the way it makes a token that isn't legendary, so they're like it's perfect for this deck since they're all legendaries. Ooh, yeah. I had to say, if we didn't get to it at some point, probably my favorite dragon of all time is Dragon Lord Silumgar, which I love that you have
there.
in here. Yes.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, so he ETBs and you gain control of target planeswalker for as long as he's around. So I love him. So I put him in, but I don't love depending on anybody else's board state. So I don't I don't like to include cards that steal things, because I would rather put cards that I want to play in my own deck as opposed to relying on what my opponents have. And conversely, I also hate when I have things stolen from me and used against me. That is just like one of my pet hates in Magic. So I put a Homeward Path in every single deck. So
nice.
For anybody who doesn't know Homeward Path, it is a land that you can tap to return creatures that you control back to their owners. So in the event that somebody steals my creatures, I hope to draw into Homeward Path and recover those creatures for myself. So it is my auto include in every single deck, because I absolutely hate having my stuff stolen. So it's a little bit unlike me to play the Silumgar, but it's so many people's favorite dragon that I had to put it. If I'm doing such like dastardly things to you, I have to at least bring you some joy while I'm doing it. So.
Yeah, playing everyone's favorites. I'd be excited. Yeah, this card, it's kind of funny because I've tried to play it in a bunch of decks over the years, Dragon Lord Silumgar, I mean, and it's true, like when I play it either there's nothing really good enough to steal where I'm like, ooh, that was awesome, but then whenever I do that, I kind of like feel a little bad because my opponent's like, oh, I like you now it's yours. There's something there, I don't know, but anyway, it's I just have a lot of nostalgia for this card because I played it a lot when Dragons of Tarkir came out, so I just have that love for it. So I just love to see it, and a 3/5 flying Death Touch is never a bad thing to have, at the very least. So
sure, right,
I'm into it. Oh, and then I also wanted to say, on the total opposite end of vibes is Shadrick's Silver Quill, which is, I actually played that as a commander for a while and I loved it, and it's very much like it gives your opponents gifts instead of taking things. So I like that. So
I made up for it. I'll steal one thing, but I'll give you other things.
I'll let you draw a card or get an Inkling token or something.
And it's I haven't seen the Shadricks get too much play in this deck just yet, but it is always fun when it comes out. So let's make a deal. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about things.
Exactly. And I could see also, so that one has an effect. You can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, or like you could give that to your opponents, but usually it's going to be yourself. And since your deck is full of enormous flyers, I could see that being pretty good. Yeah,
for sure. And I also try to be deliberate with my artifacts as well. I wanted to try to include as many legendary artifacts so that they can cascade as well. And of course there are some that are just out of necessity not going to be legendary, but I tried to really optimize as much as possible with the legendaries in this deck.
I like that a lot. Then you can just play random stuff, like play Bident of Thassa, but then cascade into, I don't know, it's a 4-mana dragon, or I guess it has to be less than. So
it has to be less, 3. So I could cascade into like another artifact or another enchantment. There are some creatures like Reiki is one of my only non-dragon creatures, and it's whenever you play a legendary spell, draw a card. This includes the
Ooh.
cascade. So anytime I'm playing a legendary of any kind, it doesn't need to be a creature. I would draw a card and then I cascade into something else, which is also a legendary. So I'll draw another card.
Ooh.
So this is a really, really great card for this deck. And I tried to be very, very deliberate about really only including dragons if possible, but this was just like I couldn't not. I needed card draw and this I couldn't not include Reiki. And for 3 mana, it's great.
Yeah, that was probably my favorite card in my legendaries deck, and it just and I kind of loved it too because it's an old like Kamigawa card, so it kind of has that factor to it. But playing legendaries and drawing a card is just so delicious.
I know. It's almost too good.
Yeah.
You know, especially early on, you know, then you just have like a stacked hand, but if you have no max hand size. But
totally.
That's another thing is that like I love to have no max hand size in any deck, but this one especially, I just love everything in this deck that it's really hard for me to choose what to discard. You know, it's real. If I have to discard down, I'm like, I don't want to. You know, I love everything here. Everything is useful and important to me. So discarding down is one of my difficult first world problem choices in this game. You know.
Yeah. I think I like to, if I can, I'll sneak in some recursion in some way, and then for the most part you can like discard a dragon and then try to get it back out. But I do understand that with this deck needing like almost 20 backgrounds and then also a huge number of dragons, like you just don't really have room for any extra like side strategies like that. So yeah, unless you have a dragon that kind of does that randomly, which there might be. That makes sense.
Yeah, but in true Ron fashion, there are no combos in this deck. It's very straightforward, wins by combat. Hard to block that many flyers. I hope to keep pumping out more and more dragons, making tokens, cascading into things, making Jodah bigger and stronger. Jodah also gives buffs all the legendaries, so you get +1 for each legendary on the board. So if I have a board state of like 10 legendary creatures, then everything's getting +10. So not only are they hard to block because they're flyers and they're already big, but they're getting bigger and bigger. So it just felt like greedy to include a combo or to like, you know, tutors or something like that, because I'm already playing out so many things and cascading, and I'm already doing so many injustices that it's like, do I really need to add something else? So this deck just hopes to win by combat damage and is just very straightforward in that way.
Nice. That's kind of nice though, since you will have a board with a lot going on. And a lot of different effects, but then your kind of like end game is just to do some simple combat damage. So it's kind of nice that you have that to like focus on when there are so many things going on in the deck.
I think I think that's people's worry, is that when they see a very busy board state, they're like, something's coming. You know, you're building up to something. And it's like, no, this is really just it. Like what you see is what's happening. There's no tricks. There's nothing coming. It's just, you know, I want more dragons and I want them to get bigger and bigger, and I'm going to swing them out at you, and that's all, you know?
Nice.
There's no tricks. And I think people see busyness and they think you're working up to something, and that's not what this is.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of it's a nice balance too, because it's like, it's complicated, but also it's not. Like it's the plan, at least the goal is pretty straightforward. So we talked about some of your favorite dragons, but what about some of your favorite backgrounds? Are there any of those that you'd like to talk about?
Sure. I like the Acolyte, the first enchantment, Acolyte of Bahamut. It says commander creatures you own have the first dragon spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast.
Oh, wow.
It's only a 2 mana, 2 cost background. So if you get this out early enough, it's great because it makes your dragons cheaper, and that cost reducer is super valuable in a deck like this. I also like Guild Artisan. Commander creatures you own have, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, then you create a treasure token. So it rewards you for attacking the opponent with the highest life. I also love Sword Coast Sailor because it makes Jodah unblockable if you're attacking the opponent with the highest life. Yeah, that's pretty gross.
Yeah, that's always a good backup plan for Jodah, is just to have Jodah attack.
Commander damage, right? He's already a 5/5 and he counts himself, so technically he's a 6/6. Because he buffs himself for being a legendary. So he's already like naturally a 6/6 if he's the only creature on the board. But if I have other creatures on the board, then he's like, a 10/10, a 12/12. He's hitting big commander damage. So having him be unblockable is a really easy way to take out somebody fast if they maybe have like flyers to block with or something like that. I also love Far Traveler, which is one of I have a Lulu deck, and it's Lulu and Far Traveler, so I use this a lot in another deck. But this lets me, at the beginning of my end step, exile one target tapped creature I control and return it to the battlefield. So anything with ETB effects, it lets me blink those back in, so that is super useful. And the Dragon Cultist, obviously there are some backgrounds that really care about dragons. The Acolyte is one, Dragon Cultist another. It says commander creatures you own have, at the beginning of your end step, if a source you control dealt 5 or more damage this turn, create a 4/4 red dragon with flying. And nice. Everything in this deck is going to deal 5 damage, or at least. So if this is out, it's pretty guaranteed to make more dragons.
That's awesome. Yeah, I also really like Feywild Visitor. That's just like a card I kind of want to play more. And it's 2 and a blue, and it says commander creatures you own have, whenever one or more non-token creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a 1/1 blue fairy dragon creature token with flying. So you get a fairy, but you also get a dragon, which can trigger all of your other dragon stuff.
Exactly. I just noticed that so many of these backgrounds have dragon text that I was like, I have to make this a dragon deck. Yeah, with Wilds of Eldraine coming out and everybody really hype about fairy decks, that's a really great card to slot in. It's a good card for Elminster, who also makes 1/1 fairy dragons. So it's super super useful in a lot of things. I think the backgrounds often get overlooked. People just assume, or people only really think of them when they play a commander that has background ability, but you can use them in your 99, and if they're very flavorful or perfect for the theme of the deck, like all these dragon ones can go in any dragon deck. It's like, why not make them useful as just enchantments as opposed to using them as a background? They don't have to be used exclusively as your commander's partner. It can be used in the 99 and still be very, very valuable. And I think making this deck and having this idea kind of taught me that. And I try to be mindful of cards that can, not just backgrounds, but cards that can be played in any deck that maybe kind of get relegated from people's options because they are typically played as commander partner.
Gotcha. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think so. The downside to backgrounds is they don't do anything unless you have your commander out.
Yes.
And I wonder if a lot of people kind of get worried about that. But like, come on, you're playing commander. Like, your commander's going to be out.
Yeah, that's the only thing is, like, if Jodah gets removed too many times, then a lot of my backgrounds are useless. But the dragons are already doing so much that, if it's so late in the game that I can't recast Jodah and I have a bunch of enchantments that are just doing nothing, I'm sure the dragons will make up for that,
Right, yeah.
So I think it's important to have that balance where you can't just rely on the one thing, like if you lose your commander and your game is over, then what, and
Yeah.
that was an issue I had with some decks that relied on commander damage. I wanted to make sure that I at least had other creatures in the deck that could deal damage or get me a win in another way in the event that that commander's lost.
Right. Yeah.
I just can't rely only on that one thing,
Totally. Yeah, and I think it works very nicely in this deck because a lot of the backgrounds are they're like better in the early game anyway, and they help you kind
Yeah.
of set up like the ones you mentioned that give you mana and things like that. And then yeah, by the time you have enough mana to be casting dragons anyway, and you've got a bunch of dragons out, like if your commander gets removed, maybe you don't need the backgrounds as much at that point anyway. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's great to have Jodah out because then everything gets buffed and everything's bigger.
Yeah.
But there have been times that I've lost Jodah and continued to play the game without him, and still had enough to get there, or, have a really good like end game strategy than without him. Though he is
Gotcha.
valuable and very useful. So you want Jodah out as much as possible, but in the event that he can't, the rest of the deck has to keep up.
Makes sense. And like of course playing 1 to 2 dragons per turn is still like not the worst you could be doing. So
Yeah. Or
yeah.
is it? It's the worst for
Yeah.
someone else.
Yeah, true. Okay, so yeah, are there any other cards in this deck that you want to shout out that maybe fill more generic roles of the deck, but that you really just kind of love in this one?
Probably Shadow Spear. It
Ooh.
is legendary, and it's the only 1 mana legendary. So when I play a 2 mana enchantment, I can cascade into Shadow Spear.
Oh, nice.
And it kind of guarantees that I'll get this out because it's the only 1 mana one. So basically, when I play a 2 mana enchantment and I know I have to cascade, the literal only thing I can cascade into is Shadow Spear. So I just search for it and shuffle, and I'm
Yeah.
like, can I just I check with the pod, but I'm like, can I just search for it? The only thing in here that's 1 mana legendary is Shadow Spear. And 10 out of 10, everybody's like, yeah, sure. And then instead of cascading 1 by 1 100 cards, I will, or 93 cards or whatever, I will just go into to fish it out and then shuffle. And then once it's out, it puts in a lot of work. So it cascades in for free, or I could play it for 1, and it equips for 2. Gives whatever it's equipping +1/+1 and trample and lifelink, but I can also pay 1. It's not a top ability, just pay 1 and permanence my opponent's control, lose hex and indestructible until the end of turn. So it'll help me either get in some removal or get in some damage, and if they block with it, then I can make sure that things are effectively gone. So Shadow Spear puts in a lot of work.
Totally. Yeah.
I love Biden of Thassa. Finding ways to get more card draw is always valuable. But I'm a big fan of artifacts. So I have a Door of Destinies in here, Chromatic Orrery, being able to spend it is 7 mana, but being able to spend mana as though it were any color is super valuable in this deck. Immortal Sun lets me draw an extra card each turn, and is a cost reducer. Spells cost 1 less, and it buffs my creatures. Dragon Arch is super useful. Pay 2, tap it. I may put a multicolored creature card from my hand onto the battlefield. So it helps me get out big creatures for only 2 mana as long as they are multicolored. So that can be pretty ugly.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think my strategy was make sure that I have enough mana, make sure that I can draw some cards, and try to get as much out as cheaply as I possibly can. So I do have some treasure generators, either in terms of creatures or enchantments. I just wanted everything to have a really good synergy, and I never wanted to feel like I was lacking something in the game. Like, oh, I wish I had another card, or I wish I had another treasure, or I wish I had another, like I wanted just to everything have as good of a balance as I could get it. And, it's a deck, so it's ever changing, and there are times that I'm like, all right, this is coming out, this is coming back in. I've moved Scroll Rack in and out of this deck a bajillion times. Currently in, but I don't know if I'll keep it. But with the Cascade effect, it is nice to be able to manipulate the top of your deck and swapping out what you might need and what you might not. Maybe putting something expensive from your hand top of your deck so that you can cascade into it, like it's super useful. It just always ends up being the thing that I cut when I need to make a cut.
Totally. Yeah.
So it goes in and out, but yeah, those are like, the unsung heroes of the deck.
I love it. I really like to see the Theros artifacts just in general. I think they're so cool.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I love that you have Bident of Thassa and Whip of Erebos and Hammer of Perforos all in here.
Yes.
To kind of,
The hammer is great because it gives everything haste, so that's great too.
Yeah.
Hasty dragons is pretty ugly.
Definitely. Yeah. And I just love these. They're so cool with the artifact border, but it's also like sparkly because it's Theros Nyx enchantment-y.
Yeah.
Big fan of those. So when it comes to like the MVP of the deck, if you had to pick one card that just kind of like works perfectly in this deck, what card would that be?
It would probably be this. I feel like my answer is going to be so boring, but it would probably be Timeless Lotus. I'm always happy to see that card just because it gives me Wooburg, and sometimes you don't draw into the right lands that you need, and being able to play Jodah anytime is, just having the right mana for it is so crucial to getting the deck going. So I probably feel like Timeless Lotus is one of them. Reiki is another one, because of the card draw. And probably Miram, though, like I will admit that I sometimes hold back. If my board state's too strong, I won't just play Miram if it's in my hand, because I assess the game and what's necessary at the moment. Just because I have it doesn't mean I have to play it. But Miram is one of those cards that like everybody hates, and if you're sitting at a table that already hates that you're playing Jodah, or they hate that you're playing dragons, slamming down Miram is not the move for that table. It's like it's just gonna create feel bads, but it is a hero in this deck. It is the perfect card for this deck, and it's great. But caution, if you don't want to lose friends, you would play Miram really wisely when you're playing this deck. But I would say that Miram is probably the strongest card for sure.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I think your Timeless Lotus choice is very responsible, just because I have found myself a lot of times in a 5-color deck, like just spending so much time sorting my lands. I'm like, okay, how can I get Wooburg? Oh, but I need this, like the white half of this one that I was going to use for blue from this land for something else later. And just having like 5 mana, you can put anything into it, and then next turn you have Wooburg.
And I have
nice.
all the triomes in here, which is lovely, but they all enter tapped, and it just slows everything down. And it's, having the Timeless Lotus be an artifact that's colorless, you can just have any type of mana and play it and get it out, and then you have Wooburg, and it's just there for you, and I love that.
Same.
I also put Ramos in here because there are so many multicolor creatures. Ramos gets a counter for every color spell you've cast. So if I cast a 3-color spell, there's three counters go on Ramos, and I can remove 5 counters from Ramos to give me double Wooburg. And I can do that at any time, so I can attack with Ramos and then do it after the fact because it's not a tap ability. I could just choose to remove. I could, deal the damage. Let's say assume he has, I don't know, 6 counters on him, then he becomes a 10-10, and I could deal that 10 damage and then remove the 5 counters after the fact, give myself double Wooburg, and play out other things in my hand that then enter untapped and give me blockers. So Ramos is valuable, but I wouldn't say the most valuable. It does. I do like that he gives me that double Wooburg, but the conditions have to be just right. I have to have played a certain amount of things in order for him to have the counters on him, and it just it's kind of like a failsafe. So if I need to like recast Jodah or something super late game and I have Ramos, it helps, but it's not the thing that is the hero of the deck,
Yeah, makes sense. It's like very, very strong and really cool if you can get it to work, but it's not going to like help you get there necessarily every time.
Yeah.
I like that. Ramos is just a really cool card though, especially in a deck with like setup like this one that already works really well for it. So yeah, I can see why you kind of had played this as the commander for this deck, or at least like tried to build it that way.
Yeah.
I like it. So when it comes to playing this deck, have you had a favorite like in-game moment that you've had while you were playing this deck?
Yeah, I've had several, I think. It's always going to sound so mean though, but I played this deck on a couple times. I wouldn't say it's like I've overplayed it, but I played it on my own stream. And I had invited a couple guests, and I was playing against Tron is Bad, and he also has a Jodah deck that he was gifted. Gifted the deck by Useless Knowledge because Tron is a competitive player who plays other formats, and famously he's actually a friend of mine from my local LGS. So I knew him before he was a streamer, before I was a streamer, like we knew each other just like as Magic players at the LGS, before either of us were ever in content creation. So he famously did not like Commander and just like would not play it. And he had a Commander deck just because like all his friends played it, and he would play once in a while, but he really did not like Commander. And once he started doing content and he became friends with Useless Knowledge was like, hey, I'm gonna build you a deck that you're gonna like I want to build you something, you're gonna love it, promise, just trust me, play it, tell me you'll play it, and if you hate it, I'll never bother you again. So he built Tron a Jodah deck, and he did love it, and he's like, okay, I guess I like Commander now. And then like it became this kind of running joke, and then he was like, oh, is this a thing? Do I like Commander now? And yeah, as it turns out, he does. So he had a Jodah deck, and I was like, well, let's play Jodah v Jodah, and our other 2 opponents were playing other things, but I was like, yeah, your Jodah deck's completely different than mine, like let's just go for it. And it ended up like coming super down to the wire, and it was just like he and I this whole time, and he had like this like indestructible board, and it just was like really hard to get through, and everybody's like, he must be stopped, we have to do something. And I'm like, but how? And then there was just this tense moment where I tried to remove like the ugly thing on his board, and he gave it indestructible, and then I tried to do something else and he stopped that from happening, and then I activated the Shadow Sphere and I removed the indestructible, and then I ended up like wiping his board, and it just was like, oh, I think I played Crux of Fate, which was destroy all non-dragon creatures. And because my deck is a dragon deck but his deck is not, it didn't impact me, it impacted his board state significantly. So gave everything indestructible, and then I took it away with the Shadow Spear, and he was like, what does that card do? And I was like, yeah, man, I kept up this 1 mana on purpose, like just in case. And he was like, oh my freaking god, like it just was such a crazy play because it just was like we just kept slamming down cards and we kept having responses for each other, and then I'm like, no indestructible for you, and he was like, what the hell does that do? So yeah, it was a really really good Jodah v Jodah moment. And
Yeah.
so we, yeah, I felt really good about myself because I'm like, I have the superior Jodah. And like every game is different, so I'm sure, you know, if it wasn't just like the perfect storm that happened that just I had in my hands that day, I'm sure he would have won because his board state was crazy as well, but it just was the right turn of things. And oh man, that was such a good memorable game.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly like the kind of thing that I love from Commander that you never know to expect. But for one, I can imagine like the two other opponents not playing Jodah decks just being like, what the hell is going on here? Like,
Yeah,
is...
I think they were really hyped. If I remember, I mean, I was like, so I think I just saw like, you know, it was like tunnel vision. Like I just was like, I must do this now. This is my time. And like, I was playing with Anna, and Anna was playing Most Dangerous Gamer, and
Ooh, fun.
so Most Dangerous Gamer, she has elements of that deck that deal poison or infect. So I think if I remember correctly, I don't remember if this was the play that took him out, but I think he already had been dealt some poison from Anna, and then I was able to play Skithrix with haste and deal the remaining poison to kill him.
Nice.
And so just like I wouldn't have been able to do it if his board state remained untouched, and I just had to find a way to make that board wipe go through. And man, it just was chef's kiss. It was the perfect thing. And you know, so many things just happened that were right, you know. And I think Anna was like, oh my god, you know, like it's like a hype moment, and like they didn't even care that they were losing at that point. They were just like, yeah, this is awesome.
So good.
It became like a Super Bowl, you know. It was like, who's gonna win? It just became tense, and we were back and forth a lot, and it was great.
I love also that you're able to, you're like, there's a dragon for everything. Like, oh, I need to kill you with infect, I've got a dragon for that. Like, Skithrix is here. That's so perfect.
Exactly.
I love that so much. So, okay. So if anyone out there is super inspired by your awesome idea to combine dragons and backgrounds into one commander deck, what advice would you give them as they're building maybe a deck kind of similar to this one?
I would probably include things that you enjoy playing, things that make you feel good, and things that are easy for you to keep track of, because in a deck like this, it's a shame to lose triggers or miss triggers and miss things that you should be getting. I think it's important to play things that are fun for you and easy to control and manipulate. I would also probably, I don't know, because I built this so much for my taste, you know, that there were just so many dragons to choose from, that there were things that I knew right away reading them. I was like, oh, I don't want to do that, you know, like I don't want to keep track of that, or I don't want to have to read this text box every time, or like, you know, remember this trigger or whatever. You know, or this wasn't worth it. It costs too much, but doesn't do what I want it to do in this deck, and it's not bringing me enough value for its cost. So I think when I went through all my dragons and I eliminated things, it was easy to eliminate things that maybe somebody else really loved and was like, oh, you got to put this in your deck. It's a great dragon. And I'm like, somebody else might say it's a great dragon, but to me, it was annoying. You know, it was like, I don't really want that in there. So I think you just have to listen to what you enjoy playing, and what other people suggest may not always be what's best for you or your idea, and where you want it to go. Like you said, there's a dragon for everything, and I just wanted to cover my bases, that that the deck was well-rounded, and I never felt like I needed something like, oh, I wish I had this thing, or I wish I had an ability or a way to get around this. It's like, I wanted to be purposeful with my choices and make sure that there was an answer to everything. Obviously, I don't always draw into those answers, but I know they're there, and I don't feel like I'm missing something.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And it's kind of cool that even though the way you've built this deck has a lot of restrictions with dragons and with backgrounds, there's still so much room for customization there. Like the balance between those two could be totally different for someone else building this. Like they could just put 10 backgrounds in instead of 19.
Yeah.
And try to kind of like focus on something there. And then, yeah, of course, there are a billion legendary dragons to choose from these days. So yeah, lots of kind of options to customize it to do whatever you want it to do. So cool. I think that is good advice.
Thank you. Sage out here.
Yes. So much
now
wisdom.
I'm curious. I'm gonna look up how many legendary dragons there are.
Ooh, good question. Yeah, there's probably more than you would expect.
I'm gonna just put legal in commander though, so I want to.
It's kind of tricky too because you've got like Morophon in here, which is a shapeshifter, so it is a dragon.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yes. Exactly. So I mean, shapeshifters excluded. There are 98 legendary dragons.
What?
Yeah, legal in commander.
Okay, I should have guessed. I would have guessed like 50 to 60. So that's like twice as many as I would have expected.
Yeah. So I think what I did was when I was building this was I went to Scryfall and I did exactly this. I looked to see how many legendary dragons there were in legal in commander at the time. You know, there may have been new ones that have been added since because I built this around Dominaria. So at the time, I don't know, maybe there were 70 something or 80 something. And then I organized it by mana value so that it was lowest to highest. And I could see if there were any dragons that were useful to me that were maybe a little bit lower cost. So that I wasn't relying only on like big heavy hitters. And then I literally it took me a long time to build this because I literally went through and read every single one and was like, do I like this? Do I want this? And then I think I built it live on stream and I had the chat helping me and the chat was kind of throwing in suggestions and I would just add things as people said them, but then I would go back and read through everything and take things away and say like, okay, no, that doesn't work for me, or I don't really like this after all, or, you know, this
Gotcha.
is kind of like the eyesore, you know, it just stands out in the wrong way. And I started taking things away.
And yeah, especially starting with so many options. It's probably easier to kind of like put them all in there and then try to like look at all the big picture and kind of focus in from there. So
yeah, I was just very thorough, you know, like I didn't want to miss anything and I wanted to make sure that I looked at every single option I had. It made for a really long deck building. I didn't finish this in a day, you know. I wasn't like, oh, I like this dragon, so I'm gonna throw this in, or I'm gonna throw that in. You know, I really looked through every single dragon and was like, do I want this? Do I not? Take this out, put this in, you know. And it's changed over time and it will continue to change, but I love this deck and I love the uniqueness of the idea. I love that I haven't seen anybody else build it in this way. You know, it's something that I kind of want to keep around if I can. I enjoy it.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing it with me and with the people listening. I really appreciate you coming on so I can ask you a bunch of questions about it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I love the insightfulness of the questions and like, you know, deep diving into the deck because it's been a while since I've looked at it in this way and had to think of these questions. So now I'm like, oh, what can I change now? Now I want to like play with it again. You know, now I want to rebuild it. So it's great to talk about it because it inspires a renewed love for it again.
Totally. Yeah. Every time I record an episode, I always kind of like want to spend some time like tinkering with my decks and looking through my cards and stuff. So yeah, this has been so much fun. And yeah, I wanted to say that of course I'll have links to all of your content and streams and everything else you've got in the episode description. But kind of before we wrap things up, will you let us know kind of like what you've got going on magic wise and maybe some things coming up?
Sure, absolutely. I will be going to a couple conventions in the fall. So look out for that. I will be posting about them. I'll be attending MagicCon Vegas, and I will be attending MTG Summit in Salt Lake City. So that will be my September and October plans. I will likely go to something if it's local, but those two are my only planned distant cons. And I'm working painstakingly on editing my own podcast, which, as you know, is really, really difficult when you're a one-man show.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure I had a bunch of recordings under the belt before I started releasing. And so I just changed my mind about it all and said, you know what, I'm just going to record the whole season and
Oh,
then
wow.
start releasing them.
That's
So
very
that way I
impressive.
never, yeah, it's been a labor of love for like the whole year. And I know I talked about putting out the podcast and then never did. It's because I changed my mind about it and just said, you know what, I don't ever want to get caught up where one time I'm like, oh, I'm super busy right now and I can't get to it. And either the quality of it will suffer because it was rushed or not edited properly, or, you know, I'll have to say, I can't release an episode this week. And, you know, I didn't want to fall into like that kind of bad habit. And I know that everybody's forgiving and life happens and things affect your schedule sometimes. And I know people will be understanding of that. But for my own sanity, I just was like, it'll be easier and less pressure for me if I can record the entire season and then just have them. And that way I can edit them at my leisure in my own pace. And then they're all done and I can release them like throughout the fall or winter every week consistently. And then next year do the same thing, just re-record and, you know, release them every week or every 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really responsible way to do that. There's no feeling more powerful as a person who makes a podcast than having like more than a few episodes in the backlog, like ready to go. So you're a little bit ahead.
Yeah, I just, you know, for myself, you know, I know that I get busy. I have a lot going on all the time. I work full time and, you know, between work and traveling and content creation and a lot of other factors, it just, I'm in a play. I'm in a small theater group, so I'm doing a play right now, and my schedule's crazy, and I just found that this is the best possible thing to do to make it work for me. But I have a little snippet preview. It is out and available to be followed. Podcast is called More Than Magic. It's available on every, you know, podcast streaming service. There just aren't any episodes uploaded yet. It's just a little preview, but you can go and follow it so that you can get the notification when the episodes do start rolling out. I'm hoping to roll them out in the fall and winter.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, definitely go like subscribe or follow Ron's podcast. And yeah, I'll add a specific link for that down below so that you can, get notified when you start releasing episodes. That's really exciting. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. I am excited to finally get them out. I some of them so long ago, and I feel bad for the people that like recorded them with me because I'm sure they are like, when is this coming out? And I'm like, it's a me thing, but I'll get there.
Oh yeah. No, for sure. I understand how much work it is. So yeah, that'll be really cool. And you can kind of focus on, I always forget how much work it is just like when an episode comes out, just doing the kind of like release promotion for it, like putting out images. And now that we have like 18 social medias to kind of keep track of, it actually takes a long time just to do that on release day. So yeah, it'll be nice to not have to focus on, recording future episodes as well. So yeah, anyway, all that is to say I'm jealous of the way you've set this up. I think it's going to be really nice.
Thank you. I don't know if I would be jealous of me because I feel really stressed about it actually, but it's the best way that I could work it out for myself, I think.
Well, yeah, anyway, thank you for coming on and talking about one of your favorite commander decks with me. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say about it before we wrap things up?
Thank you for having me. Thank you for bringing me on again. Thank you for being just so fun to talk to. that I have kept you here for hours chatting with me. All of the stuff that we talked about that was not recorded, just like chatting, and it's like, oh yeah, we have a thing to record. We should do that. So thank you for being just a good friend, and I appreciate you and everything you do and all the hard work you put in. This is a really, really great podcast, so I'm honored to be on it.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And of course, like anytime, I'm happy to chat. I get so much fulfillment out of it. So yeah, anytime. Okay, I think it's time we wrap this episode up. So yeah, thank you everyone so much for listening. One final shout out to all of my patrons at the All That Glitters level. Speaking of All That Glitters, really cool new art for that card coming out in Wilds of Eldraine. So I'm personally very excited for that. But yeah, so Jeff, thank you for being my current patron at the All That Glitters level. I appreciate it a lot. And check out the links down below for Ron's stuff and also the Faerie Conclave. And thank you all so much for listening. And I hope I'll catch you next time.